welcome to a Majacraft combing video. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to blend colours together with hand combs. This is a form of optical blending in which we're going to take some pre-dyed fibres and mix the colours together using the combs to create a new colour. We also have another fabulous video by Pat Old in which she demonstrates how to use your Majacraft combs to prepare washed fibre from the fleece and get it ready for spinning. That's also here on our YouTube channel. But today we're going to use, we've got two sets of combs here. I've got the extra fine combs, which are what I would use for the very finest of fibres. But for the fibre I'm using today, which is merino, I'm going to be using my standard Majacraft combs, which are fine combs, and they work wonderfully well with the merino fibres. And so I'm going to actually blend, these are basically the primary colours. So what I'm going to do is start with blending two of them together. So these will make quite a bright orange. And then I'm going to experiment by adding some blue. And also I've got a little bit of fire star here, which I'll add in for some bling. The great thing about combs is you can really have good control over the amount and proportions of fibre that you're using. So I'm just going to open this up a little bit and start lashing it on. And to do this, I'm just holding my comb upright and I'm taking the fibre down through the tines and just drafting it back. And you can see it just holds onto the comb, or actually the fibres hold onto themselves. I really try and get just the tips going onto the comb, which reduces the amount that's at the back of the comb, which often ends up as waste even when you're using pre-prepared fibre. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting it on in layers, and the thinner the layer, the quicker it's going to blend. So it's quite efficient to, rather than put on all my pink and all the yellow, I'll put it on in a few layers, and that way it actually already starts blending before I've even used the comb. The thinner the layer, the quicker the blending once you start combing. And I'm going for about 50-50 on this. I think I started with the pink, so I'll finish with the yellow. Now I like to fill the comb up about this far, a bit less than halfway, because as you comb it will lift up the comb and open up. But I also like to lift it up away from the base. What happens if when you load the fibre on, when you're lashing it on, it runs down through the tines and pushes all together at the base. And what happens there is it gets very compacted and it makes it difficult to swap and move off the comb. So I'm just going to lift it up and put some air in amongst it. Now, this is what I do for combing. Lots of people comb in different ways. So find what works for you and what is the most comfortable. But generally speaking, I'll have one comb in my left hand. And this is my stationary comb. It always stays upright. So at the moment the tines are pointing up towards you. This is always going to stay this way up. And my other comb is my moving comb. And this is the one that's going to change directions. Just move that out of the way. So what I'm going to do, and this is why it's quite good to have this top-down view, is I'm going to start at the tips and just pull my comb through the tips. You can see it's already starting to transfer onto the moving comb. So start at the tips and then work your way back towards the tines. And as it transfers from one comb to the other, it will begin to blend. You can still see quite distinct colours in there. However, they're a lot more blended. Now this is where it's a matter of choice and perhaps what project you're going to use it for and the look of the yarn that you want to get. But the amount of combing you do, obviously the more you comb it, the more it blends. So if you want a very, very smooth blend you want to comb it a number of times, or if you want to have a little bit of definition of colour, then you could leave it at this and remove it from the comb after just one pass. But I'm going to keep going because it's fun, and eventually I'm going to want to add another colour in. So now I'm just going to move this fibre up the comb like I did before, just to loosen it up, and I'm going to transfer it back, and this is where sometimes people get a little bit tangled up. So this comb, my stationary comb, is still facing upright. I'm not moving it, it's still facing upright. My moving comb is still doing all the work, but this time I'm going to swipe it down through the stationary comb tines. So I'm going down, so it's like a sort of circular motion, up and around and down. And I want to pull it back far enough that the fibres pull apart. If you don't pull it back far enough, if you come back round here, you can see what happens with these fibres is they fold back on themselves, and that's not what you want. You want to have them nicely straightened out, because what we're making here is a worsted preparation. So it needs to be smooth and all the fibres parallel. So now I've turned my comb. I was combing this way. Now I want to encourage a bit more fibre off it, so I'm going to turn it up the other way and come back this way. Again, circular motions, up and down through the tines of the stationary comb. So there's a little bit left on here, but I think I'm going to give it one more pass. Again, lift up the fibres, smooth them up the comb a little bit, and then taking the moving comb, stationary comb upright again, I'm going to take this from the tips and swipe through the fibre. This is actually a really gorgeous colour, just as it is. But I am going to add another colour, because one of the great things about combing is you get to experiment with colours in small quantities. So if you have an extra colour and you think, oh, I wonder what will happen if I add a third colour into this mix, then you can do that with a fairly small amount of risk, because it's a small amount of fibre. And you might find that you really like it, in which case you might choose to do a lot more of it. Okay, so you can see I've just been flipping backwards and forwards with my moving comb, and my stationary comb has remained upright. So now I've got this beautiful colour here, which I actually really like, but I'm going to add something to it. I'm going to add the blue. The interesting thing about this optical blending is, unlike when you're mixing up paints or dye colours in liquid form, when you mix up two liquids together, a red and a blue, you will get purple, and you will not see any red and blue in there anymore. The pigment's much too small for our eyes to see. But when you're mixing fibres together, the fibres themselves don't change colour. There's still the same yellow in there and the same pink in there, because they haven't magically changed colour. But optically, when we look at it, we see a new colour because they combine together. So when I add a third colour, like this blue, it's a lot less likely to go muddy than it would if I was mixing liquid colours together, because those individual colours are remaining intact. So, I'm just going to blend this through. We'll see what we get. What's happening at the moment is that the blue is cooling down that pink and yellow. So whereas without the blue it was really quite bright and vibrant, now it's getting softened with the blue. So here's the first pass with the blue, and you can still see there's individual patches of blue in there. So I'm going to keep blending because I want to blend this through really quite thoroughly. And you know what, while we do this, I'm also going to add in a little bit of bling. This is a mix of the same pink and yellow and blue in Firestar. So I'm just going to add a little bit of this. I want it to have a touch of bling. And another reason for doing this with the combs is you can get a very thorough blend. You don't get patches of bling in just one lump. It will blend it through very evenly, and it also means that you can play around with the quantities and proportions, so it can be very blingy or it can be quite subtle. So I'm just going to lift this up the tines again. And here, if you find at any point that your fibre isn't transferring from one comb to the other, then it's quite good to stop and just lift it up at the back, because it may mean it's got a bit compacted together and the fibres don't want to let go of each other. So initially when I put that blue on, I was like, is this a mistake? Is this going to look terrible? But actually now that it's really blending together, I'm really liking the softness and the subtlety of this colour. I'm just going to transfer these fibres over to here and let you have a look. Lift this up. This is the point where I start to think that it's really some kind of magical fairy fibre on there. Very pretty. So you may notice also, if we look at it this way, all the fibres I've used have been the same length. So they've all come from the same comb top of merino, and the Firestar fibres are also around about the same length staple. And what this means is that when we pull this away, which I'm going to do now and show you how to take it off the comb, we always start pulling from the tips. Now if I had very long fibres in there, I'd be pulling out from the tips, I'd be pulling out the long fibres first because they come out further. And the short fibres would stay back down here until I worked all the way down there. So I'd end up with all the long fibres and then all the short fibres separated, which is not what I want to do with this. Especially if my long fibres were blue and my short fibres were yellow, I'd end up with blue, pink and yellow, which is defeating the purpose of the combing and blending. So what I'm going to do to remove this, some people will use, you can get a clamp with this. It comes with the kit and it comes with the clamp, and you can clamp it to your desk, to the edge corner of the desk. I haven't done that. I have my own technique. I'm sure lots of other people do this. I just hold my comb down, gather up the tips, move that one out of the way, gather up the tips and just gently hold them between my thumb and my finger and just pull them away. And you're basically just gently drafting backwards all the way, a little bit at a time. If it gets too thin, it's going to break and you're going to get it off the comb in pieces. That is not the end of the world. If that happens, it's perfectly fine because you just spin them one after the other. So I'm just drafting it back. If it gets a little bit hard to draft, you can give it a wiggle and just pull that away. If it's too hard to draft, if you feel like you're fighting it, you've got your hands too close in and you're trying to pull against both ends of the staple. So that's why we're taking the tips, and as we move down towards the tines, of course the tips are moving closer into the tines. So just remember that if you're fighting it, you're probably doing something wrong. Take a pause and just rearrange your hands a little bit, hold them further away. You can take quite a lot off here. There we go. And what's left on here now is just short pieces, and I would be putting this into a little pile to keep for my drum carding. And what we're left with is this beautiful little nest of fairy fibres. Isn't that gorgeous? So that is how we colour blend with the Majacraft Fine Combs. Thanks for joining.